The following podcast is brought to you by Iconic Nation Media.
Welcome to the Business Technology Podcast, where we simplify tech for business owners who don't have time to waste. I'm Scott.
And I'm Alec.
Every week, we break down practical tools, smart strategies, and real-world stories that help your business work better. Let's dive into today's episode. Today's episode, we're going to talk about disaster planning for your business. So we're based in Southern California. Typically, we have a lot of wildfires in the fall. And by the time this episode comes out, we hope that people can listen and kind of be prepared in advance. So typically what we've seen in a lot of businesses in our area is when the wildfire season comes around, there's going to be a lot of power outages. So if you have a lot of people working in an office, the power goes out. That means there's no internet, no access to the information, no computers. What do you do? So that's where we'd like to really dive in and help make sure that businesses can be prepared for that event, whether they're on the East Coast and it's a hurricane, the Midwest and it's a tornado, or it's here in the West Coast where we have fire season and we're dealing with these frequent power outages. The COVID period allowed us to really experiment and evolve the way that we can provide a modern workplace for businesses, just because so many people were working from home. So how do you take what we've learned in that world and provide a good system for modern businesses to deal with their disaster recovery? So what do you suggest, Alex? Should I go into how that's done for businesses, or should we talk about who this would affect?
Well, I would say, would it be inappropriate to reference the fire that happened this prior year and mention, going into a new fire season, there may be certain questions that business owners have on the front of their mind, just because they saw exactly what happened last year. Now, while we're hoping that nothing ever happens to that scale again, there are disasters that always come, and they never come with a knock on the door.
Yeah. So I guess let's ask ourselves the question, if you're a business owner right now, here's a couple of things you can ask yourself. If the power goes out at your business, what happens? Do you have an uninterruptible power supply going to your server? Is your network going to stay online when the internet in the area is out? So think about when you get that Spectrum outage, or you get that Frontier outage, or you get the notification, hey, internet's going to be down. Well, is your business going to be affected by that? Or do you have a redundancy? So one of the topics I really want to focus on too is having good failover. So if you're a business that wants to keep everybody in the office when there's a disaster, well, you got to make sure that first and foremost, you have power. So some people have a generator in their business. Some people have an electric power bank that can power on their server, their network devices, but ensuring that you can still connect to the internet somehow and receive phone calls for your business.
So, leading into, mid-September, early October right now, it's kind of becoming that fire season in our area. Would you have any sort of advice or maybe a checklist for some business owners that they can go into kind of disaster ready?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the first thing business owners need to understand is what part of their system is accessible in the cloud and what part of their system is only accessible on their local server. So to really understand that, a server is just like a big computer, and you may have it sitting in a closet somewhere that you've never looked at, and maybe someone set it up for you, but you know that, hey, there's a server and it's important, it needs to be there. So if you had to ask all your employees to go home, could they still remote into that server? Do they have the ability to connect and talk to the company system from different locations? So first step is assessing, okay, what are those systems do I have on site that are on the server? Which leads into the second thing is, okay, how can I allow my employees to access it remotely? A lot of businesses have figured out during the COVID world that, hey, we need to update this a little bit more so we have the flexibility for remote employees who maybe are in a different state or even in a different country to still access that information securely. So if you're one of those businesses that have informations or systems on a physical server, this is really important to think about your physical infrastructure to protect that device. I encourage a lot of businesses to start thinking about the cloud because you have massive data centers that have power redundancy, they have armed security, you have multiple failovers of your environment built into their system that you don't have to worry about. So if you want to host it yourself, you have to have your IT closet, you got to have it well air conditioned, you have to have an uninterruptible power supply. And how big is that? Are you expecting your downtime to be a couple of days or just an hour? Here in California, if there's a wildfire, they're going to shut down the power for the entire week. There's no power supply that could last that long. So then do you have a generator to power that server? So you're expending thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in infrastructure to support that server still. So if you have a server and you don't have the infrastructure to back it up, it's a great reason to think about, hey, can I move these systems to the cloud? Am I a company that uses QuickBooks on premise? Well, maybe I should consider QuickBooks Online and really making that change so I can just go on the internet from any computer, log in with my QuickBooks and two-factor authentication code, and get access to the company system. So if you could think about that approach for your business, how do we move to the cloud? How do I access these types of tools online? We generally think that's a better decision than trying to beef up your office infrastructure to prevent against a wildfire. I mean, worst case scenario in a wildfire or a hurricane, you lose all the equipment in your building, right? If it burned to the ground, if it was completely flooded. If you don't have a cloud backup of that on-premise information, and on-premise, I mean, it's at your office. It's the server in the closet. If that goes bye-bye, what happens? So while you're listening to this, think about that. Do you have steps in place? Do you have a backup? Is your backup a hard drive plugged into the back of the server? Some people consider that a backup, but an IT person would not. We take the rule of thumb of 3-2-1. You should have your data backed up in 3 different locations, and you should have it in 2 different forms of media, and 1 you should own a copy of yourself. So setting up the businesses that we support for redundancy, we want to make sure that they have multiple options. If the entire West Coast infrastructure and all the data centers suddenly became offline, well, we have East Coast backups so that our clients can still send and receive emails, access their important company information in SharePoint or OneDrive, and really continue to do business. But I would say if you're just managing it yourself, there's a high probability that you wouldn't be able to continue working if, let's say, the San Jose data center for Microsoft went down. So these are just a couple of items to consider.
So when you were speaking a little earlier, you referenced, needing, failover and having some sort of redundancy set in place. For those of us who don't necessarily know what that means or how that applies, can you kind of dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the IT world, the failover or redundancy means that you have eliminated all the single points of failure. So typically, most businesses who don't have redundancy or failover just have one internet provider. They may have dedicated fiber, they may have a cable solution, but it's just one internet pipeline coming into the building. And if your business relies on the internet, which if you're listening, it probably does, you're going to want to make sure that you don't have that single point of failure. So you may have a cellular backup. In case that main cable provider or that fiber provider goes down, you should consider having a secondary internet source that's configured by someone so that if the main primary internet source stops working, your secondary internet source still allows your employees to work. Because without internet, you can't send or receive emails, you can't access all your company files, you can't communicate internally, so you might as well just send everybody home and call it a day. That's where we would recommend having redundancy in place, especially if you're in an area that is prone to these types of outages where there may be service outages or your internet service provider may be doing upgrades. And if your business relies on a stable internet connection because you're processing payments frequently, because you need to access that very sensitive client file in an immediate way because they're calling you and asking a question about it, well, you should really heavily consider having that redundancy in place.
What would you say for those employees who are primarily remote, their entire, remote work is done at home, but now their home is the one that's, offline? How do you support those organizations where the majority of their remote employees are all in one area, they always work remote, but now the organization has kind of been hit because they're all out?
Well, there is a benefit to having your employees work from home in the terms that they're probably all not going to be affected. I mean, unless they all lived in the same apartment complex, they're probably in different cities, potentially even different states. You're really kind of, spreading out your risk into different silos, because not everybody's going to be affected at once if you are in that remote environment. But if you are a home user, and we do support a lot of clients who have remote employees, and the best we can do to really support them is ensure that they have a secure and compliant machine. It would be impossible for really any organization to manage a employee's home network, right? There's so many different variables. Is it wireless? Are they hardwired? Do they have fast internet? Do they pay for the cheapest internet? So many factors out of control. We want to make sure that if you're the business owner, you need to ensure that your system could be accessed in many different ways, right? Whether they need to be on a hotspot on their phone, whether they have really fast internet, if they have slow internet, you're going to need to be able to have a system in place that can cater to all those different types of needs, because you really can't control what that home network is, but you can control their access to it. So that's the approach we take, is really ensuring that their access is something that can be restricted, or it can also be taken away in case of its employee that no longer is with the business. We just want to cut them off from the business network, wipe it from their machine, but not necessarily go to their house and install network equipment or security and stuff like that. So those are reasons why we don't touch home networks, but your MSP should typically give you enough options for remote employees to access network. Okay, but we're getting a little off topic from disaster planning. So if we went back through our checklist, the things that you're trying to consider, so you've looked at all your different programs and you've identified that, hey, I'm able to move all these to the cloud. That's a great option. And now my employees can access it from anywhere with a stable internet connection. If you'd like that to be your office, like I said, you can have a redundancy solution in place, which is 2 internet providers. If one goes down, the other should likely still be working. If the power goes out, it's usually affecting a whole block or an entire part of the city, you can still typically connect to the internet if you can power on your network devices. So what I'm trying to say is providing the right IT infrastructure and working with a managed service provider or an IT provider to get your redundancy solution in place. All the power in your city could be out and you guys can still be accessing the internet. So if that's important to you, if that thing's, if you can stand apart from the competition a little bit or provide value to your clients by still being available during a disaster, that could be really awesome. So one thing a lot of businesses have also, as our 4th checklist item, is a phone system. So what happens right now if you have to leave the office, right? If you couldn't access the building, could you guys still operate? Could people access the phone system online through a browser? Could people physically take their VoIP phones or maybe their older phones to their home office and continue to operate? That's something you want to think about as well, is continuing to be able to answer the phone when there's no power or when there's a disaster could set your business apart from other businesses. So for ITS, we typically do a hosted VoIP platform. That means that it's in the cloud. You can access it from anywhere. You can get it on your phone, your mobile phone, you can access it from, or you can take your physical hardware and plug it in at your home network, connect wirelessly, and take phone calls just as like you were at your desk at your office. So making sure that you have a flexible VoIP or a flexible communication and voice option for your business is important to think about as well.
Going back to, let's say, the disasters, past, the employees are returning to office. Is there anything that, the MSP or the business owner should check before everyone's kind of back up and running in that physical office from a disaster where things are either compromised, lost, etc.?
Well, hopefully with the right environment set up, you won't even notice a difference, right? You'll have the flexibility of the modern workplace to work in the office. The next day, work remotely. The next day, work in a coffee shop. If you can have a good redundant solution, you're going to be able to have that same feeling of flexibility and come in anytime and have your systems in place. But if you do experience a disaster where you actually lose your sensitive company information and don't have a backup, you may have a really hard time kind of recovering from that. So consider in your planning and in your thought process for, do I need an IT provider, an MSP? Think about, do I have sensitive company data living in a machine in my office? Because if so, it could be worth considering moving to a more modern solution like the cloud, partnering with an IT provider who can help ensure that you have redundancy in place and ensuring that if you want companies to, or if you want your employees to always be able to work from the office, having those uninterruptible power supplies as well as multiple internet solutions so that you can always be up and running. So that wraps up today's episode of redundancy and failover and disaster planning. We hope that your business can be prepared for the events like this. But if not, I'd highly recommend reaching out to a managed service provider and trying to get set up for that. So that's it for today's episode of the Business Technology Podcast. Our goal is simple: to be your go-to resource for all things business technology. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you'd like more information about ITS, you can find us on Instagram at ITS Telecom, or you can find us on LinkedIn at Integrated Telemanagement Services. Both are linked in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on a later episode.